Okay, this is the video lecture part A on intelligence for Sissonville High School. You've already looked at the videos, hopefully, on domestic violence and on the internet, those two special topics. And you should also have read the chapter on learning and the chapter on memory. So the chapter I think in your book is chapter 6. We're going to kind of skip to the end part where it starts with intelligence, and that's where we're going to start here. Lots of different theories on intelligence we could discuss. And this cartoon strip, if you can't read it, I'll read it to you. How intelligent you're considered to be is largely dependent upon the culture that you're living in and really the time in history that you're at as well. I may do very well on a paper and pencil test or on a computerized test in high school or college, but if you place me within a society where I'm asked to hunt or to farm or to build a hut, I might be in trouble. And that's exactly what this cartoon says. He's saying, you can't build a hut, you don't know how to find edible roots, and you know nothing about predicting the weather. In other words, you would do terribly on our IQ test. So again, intelligence is really sort of subjective, if you will, and we define intelligence in different ways. How would you know that someone is intelligent? As you're kind of writing this down, and again, let me say, if I didn't already, there's not a PowerPoint shell for this, so you'll need to really take good notes with your own paper and pencil or pen for this, or you can type it out, but there will not be a PowerPoint shell for this. So, how would you know that someone is intelligent? List the characteristics that you would associate with someone being intelligent. I guess we could all do this. If you ask me, I might say something like, well, if someone is smart, then they would, or if someone is intelligent, then they would do well on a test. Okay, that could be a measure of intelligence. Or maybe a sign of intelligence are social skills, a person's ability to be able to blend into certain situations, to communicate effectively with different groups of people from different walks of life. That could be another hallmark sign of intelligence. What about someone with visual spatial skills? In other words, someone who's able to look at something, take it apart, maybe with their hands, and maybe put it back together. The ability to sort of gauge objects in physical space, to kind of get an idea of where things need to be in terms of position. We don't typically think of that as being an aspect of intelligence, but it certainly is and can be. How else might you know if someone is intelligent? Well, maybe we could look at, have to be able to spell it, their careers. Someone who has been very successful with their jobs or with their career, that could be a sign of intelligence. Or can it? Maybe not. So there are lots of different ways that we could measure intelligence, or different ways we could try to figure out why we think someone is or is not intelligent. And those are just a few. So let me get back here. Okay. Some classic definitions of intelligence. And your book does talk about these as well. Spearman, 1904. Spearman said that there was a general ability which involved mainly the education of relations and its correlates. And if you have your textbook, I think on page 220, 221, in those general areas, you can kind of read up on this as well. Spearman talked about what was called a G factor, or a general factor. I would write that down. And it is defined on page 220 in your book. But the general factor is a single intellectual capacity that underlies the positive correlations among different tests of intelligence. So sort of making the assumption of a general factor for intelligence. Binet and Simon, 1905, define intelligence as the ability to judge well, to understand well, and to reason well. So judging, understanding, and reason. Lewis Terman, 1916, talks about the capacity to form concepts and to grasp their significance. Thurston, the capacity to inhibit instinctive adjustments, to flexibly imagine different responses, and realize modified instinctive adjustments into overt behavior. And again, you can stop and start this, pause it as you need to sort of take notes. And your book does reinforce this. I want to just say that again. So I would suggest having your book with you as you look at this. Okay? David Weschler, 1939, talks about the aggregate or global capacity of the person to act purposefully, to think rationally, and to deal effectively with the environment. And one of the most popular tests of intelligence was developed by Weschler, David Weschler, in 1958, called the Weschler Adult Intelligence Scale. And I would advise you to look on in the edition that I have, it's page 217, where it discusses some of the subtests and some simulated examples of some of the questions that are asked on his intelligence test. And you can see the different areas that are sort of accessed in terms of overall intelligence. He talks about verbal intelligence, as you can see, and also nonverbal intelligence. I'll let you look at that. Sternberg, 1985, the mental capacity to automatize information processing and to emit contextually appropriate behavior in response to novel or new situations. Gardner, the ability or skill to solve problems or to fashion products which are valued within one or more cultural settings. And in your textbook, I want to find the right page for this as I'm flipping through here. Gardner says that there are basically 9 types of intelligence, and you can look at that on page 223. Linguistic, spatial, musical, logical, mathematical, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, naturalist, and existential. And you can kind of look at table 5, and it gives you definitions of each of his types of intelligence. So he's saying that there's not just one type, there are several different types, and probably all of us are intelligent or have greater amounts of intelligence in some of these areas and maybe less in others. So I would urge you to look at that. Cultural differences in views of intelligence. In China, the emphasis is on benevolence and doing what is right. So being kind, doing well and doing nice things for other people. The importance of humility, being humble, freedom from conventional standards of judgment, and knowledge of oneself. So those are emphases on intelligence in China, which probably is a lot different from what we would emphasize in terms of intelligence, or what intelligence is within our culture. In Africa, conceptions of intelligence revolve largely around skill that people develop, skill that help to facilitate and maintain harmonious and stable intergroup relations. Example, in Zimbabwe, the word for intelligence, nware, actually means to be prudent and cautious, particularly in social situations and relationships. So again, different places, different cultures, different ideas about what it means to be intelligent. There's some more on Spearman and the G factor, and I'll let you kind of stop and start this. And again, look in your book for this stuff too, because it will help. Thurstone, with his Thurstone and primary mental abilities, he invented what's called factor analysis, which is again discussed in your book. When he applied factor analysis to items making up intelligence tests, he discovered several broad group factors, actually about a dozen of them. 7 which have been frequently corroborated are referred to as the primary mental abilities, and I would be familiar with those. Verbal comprehension, word fluency, number, space, associative memory, perceptual speed, and inductive reasoning. And I would jot those down. Problem: primary mental abilities correlated with one another. Vernon more recently said that the G factor was the single factor at the top of a hierarchy, including two major groups of factors: verbal educational, practical mathematical, spatial physical, and under these were the primary mental abilities. So we're getting kind of technical here with this stuff. Now, your book also talks about these types of intelligence: fluid and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence refers to nonverbal and culture-free forms of intelligence. It's related to a person's ability to learn and solve problems. It's used in adapting to new situations. Crystallized intelligence, however, deals with what one has already learned through the investment of fluid intelligence in cultural settings. It's highly culturally dependent, so it depends on where you're born at in the world and how you are socialized into your specific culture. And it's used for tasks which require learned or habitual responses. There you can see fluid and crystallized intelligence and development across the lifespan. Fluid intelligence tends to tail off into middle adulthood and late adulthood. Crystallized intelligence tends to continue to develop into our later years. Sternberg had what he called his triarchic theory. Analytic, which is the ability to judge, evaluate, compare, and contrast. Creative, the ability to invent, discover, and imagine. And practical, the ability to apply knowledge to practice. Gardner argues for multiple intelligences. We mentioned that earlier. He says that there are several relatively independent human intelligences. Here are some. Now, the book, this is a little older, but the book gives you a few more on page 223. You'll want to know them all. Linguistic, we'll go through some of them and kind of look and see where you might fall. See where you think you might be, where you might have higher levels or lower levels of these intelligences. Linguistic, sensitivity to language, grasping new meanings easily. Musical, some of you are musically inclined. Sensitivity to speech and tone. The ability to compose and understand music, for example. Logical, mathematical, abstract reasoning and manipulation of symbols. Spatial, relationships among objects and the ability to recreate visual images. So we're talking about the ability to reason well about spatial relationships. Bodily kinesthetic, representing ideas in movement. The ability to plan and understand sequences of movements. People who are dancers or athletes are high on bodily kinesthetic intelligence. We have personal, and now that's broken down into intrapersonal and interpersonal. Intrapersonal intelligence is the ability to understand yourself, having insight into yourself. Interpersonal intelligence refers to the ability to understand other people and social interactions outside of oneself or outside of yourself. So I would know the difference between the two, which are highlighted in your text as well. Social, sensitivity to motives, feelings, and behaviors of others. And we're going to call that the end of this part. Thanks.